Netflix original Grace and Frankie bears remarkable similarities in its topics and subject matter to that of a particular golden sitcom. It deals with themes and tropes of television while also commenting on American society of today. Netflix Grace and Frankie has some remarkable similarities to another golden sitcom relating in its subject matter, tropes, themes, and topics. The Golden Girls is a long-running staple of the 1980s and has become a beacon of sorts in telling the stories of middle-aged women that aren't 30 years old anymore. While Netflix's original show Grace and Frankie builds on the same idea, it still tackles very different topics in its own right, building on the trailblazing show of the 1980s. So for those who don't know what the Golden Girls is, where have you been and what have you been doing? But to give you a Cliff Notes version of the show centers around four older women that move into a house together that are either widowed or divorced. The cast of the show includes a variety of actors and actresses, including Rue McClanahan, playing Blanche Devereaux, Dorothy Zbornak is played by Beatrice Arthur, Estelle Getty plays Sophia Bocello, and Betty White plays Rose Nyland. Grace and Frankie has also some particular golden actors and actresses as its main role, mainly being Jane Fonda as the titular Grace, Frankie played by Lily Tomlin, Martin Sheen plays Robert Hansen, and Sam Watson plays Sol. Grace and Frankie follows two women in their twilight years that have suddenly come to the confrontation of divorce after their husbands leave them for each other. And now they suddenly have to share a beach house property together. The show also follows the main stories as they struggle in coming out and dealing with the identity crisis of being gay and what it means to them, as well as getting married. But it mainly focuses on these two women as they start to find friendship in one another and find comfort in their new situation. Now, what do these two shows have in common in particular? Well, apart from their main actors being of the same age, while Grace and Frankie leans heavily into the commentary, Golden Girls doesn't lean as particularly heavy into it. This could be expected for a show that is a sitcom in the 1980s, but it still tackles some very difficult and the very part of society of how we perceive older women. For instance, there's one episode where Bea Arthur's character Dorothy seeks medical attention after suffering from a cold for more than 5 months. Each doctor doesn't believe that she has something else than a cold and says she's only getting old and she should rest more. As time goes on, she even goes to New York to seek medical attention there, but there is no luck there either. Finally, in the second episode, or the follow-up episode, she is referred by a friend to a doctor that finally gives her a diagnosis: chronic fatigue syndrome. This episode came out right after the creator of the show, Susan Harris, was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and she wasn't believed either by anyone. She wasn't believed by any doctor either, and only when she was diagnosed she felt some sense of relief finally knowing what it was. Another episode that takes aging into account is where Dorothy is convinced that her mother, Sophia, is becoming more and more hard of hearing. She takes her to the doctor to find out that she is the one to get a hearing aid, not her mother, and she finds this deeply upsetting as she is still younger than her mother. While there is no direct parallel in these episodes with Grace and Frankie, there are still similar types of plot lines in the stories. The first episode I can think of is one where Frankie has a mini stroke, and this causes Grace to freak out after Frankie refuses to go to the hospital. She rather calls over her doctor and only after her doctor, more a hipster type, tells her to go to the hospital, she finally goes. There they learn that she has suffered from a mini stroke, but also a significant stroke 10 years earlier, and she has to make some drastic lifestyle changes in the future to prevent this from happening. Another plotline, while not being particularly prevalent, is one where Frankie refuses to get a hearing aid after mentioning to Grace she couldn't hear her new partner on their first date. She she does get one in the end, but it still takes some convincing from Grace. Overall, the subject matter that the Golden Girls and Grace and Frankie attend to is much the same. Their approaches in the subject matter and topics are wildly different. This could be expected from a show that is produced in the late 1980s and that is produced and from a show that is produced 40 years later from the previous landmark show. The medium of these two are wildly different from each other, the one being a sitcom in the 1980s that still was aired on network television, and this had to have some mass appeal, and it did. Grace and Frankie doesn't need mass appeal and is a single camera show that is distributed by a streaming service. Thus, it also talks about other elements that women face in their twilight years, not necessarily just aging. The idea of retirement is also one that both shows tackle. Retirement is a source of heartache for many elderly as it is a big change for them. The form of retirement is mostly seen with Sophia as her daughter Dorothy constantly threatening to send her back to her previous care home where she came from, Shady Pines. In Grace and Frankie, there is an actual storyline where both children of Grace and Frankie manipulate them into going to a care home, saying the one and the other needs it more than they do. Although the two women realize this soon enough, the show deals with this with great care, no pun intended. They break out and go back to the beach house to find that it has been sold, and they get it back. Not only does Grace and Frankie deal with the topic of aging, it also deals with elements of queer love, coming out, the modern family, along with racism, and America and societal view of an older woman. Just like the Golden Girls showed us that grandma is more than just someone who waits for the grandkids to come and visit, so does Grace and Frankie build and expand on this very idea that once in your twilight years, nothing is smooth sailing. If you would like to see me discuss more of this particular show in depth, let me know. I am Peter Problem, and you are watching Culture Look.